you for joining our Wednesday evening Bible study. Please stay tuned for some important announcements immediately following the service.
We're walking through the book of Philippians, the 4th chapter. Look with me in Philippians, the 4th chapter. Philippians, the 4th chapter. I understand that there's a series on now called Power, right? I started watching it. Some stuff just too scary though. And it's not cause of ghosts or stuff. You just hate to think people are that bad, right? There's some shows you just can't. You just start watching. You say, Lord, I hate to think. Because what'll happen is when you start watching them shows, you start picking out personality traits from folk you know. You start saying, now you know Maurice act just like Ghost, and I can't do it. But this work, Philippians, particularly its 4th chapter, is about what real power looks like. So the remainder of this Philippians series, I'm going to talk about the power. He talks about power. And look here, verses 1 through 3. Therefore, my beloved and longed-for brethren, my joy and crown. So stand fast in the Lord, beloved. I implore Euodia and I implore Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. And I urge you also, true companion, help these women who labored with me in the gospel with Clement also, and the rest of the fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. The grass withers and the flowers thereof fade away, but the word of our God shall stand forever. This lesson about power today talks about the power to unify. The power to unify. You may be seated in the presence of the Lord. Again, now we're reading as Paul is talking here to the church at Philippi. It is a special church. They have a special place in his heart. This is almost his love letter, and he's talking about how unity needs to be seen in the church. Remember, he concluded when we met on last week about talking about our conversation or our citizenship. Our conduct ought to be like it is in heaven. And he says if our conduct is in heaven, we are not like those who only have earthly goals, that everything they do is to satisfy. He literally says their God is their stomach, that our goals are eternal. We are living to be like the Lord. Our home is already in heaven. And when he says that, he says to this church, okay, since we know we are not like them, since our goal is in heaven, let us strive to be united. This lesson is really about the danger of disunity within a congregation. Because Paul says it's really interesting in here. He begins this letter, first of all, by giving a pastoral example of unity. As your pastor, as the one who he writes this letter to them, he says, let me show you what unity looks like. Let me give you an example of what it's like. How do you keep people unified? It's right here in the text. Somewhere somebody got the idea that pastors and churches were supposed to be against each other, that it's an us-them, an I-them mentality. But Paul said it's not me and you, it is us. It's right here. And Paul says the way to do that, it's in the text, you can walk along with me, is he first of all, he uses this word of personal affection. He says, my beloved longed for brethren. Now, normally when Paul would write, he would say to the brothers and sisters who are here, to the so-and-so who are here. But he uses two terms in the Greek that are intimate terms. He says, not only do I love you, this word beloved, that I love you, that I care. It is the God love in me. But he says, I am longing for you. I'm not just praying for you, I want to be with you. I don't just love you. He says, I even like you. I like being around you. I am longing for you. Paul is in jail, remember? He's in jail. He's going to probably die. And while he is in jail, he is thinking about the church at Philippi. Now, if you're honest with me, you'll tell me, now, Pastor, if I'm in jail getting ready to die, there's a whole lot of other stuff on my mind than what's going on at the church. But Paul says that I love you. You are my beloved. I am longing for you. Do you work at loving and longing for the people in your fellowship? As a matter of fact, some of us boast on how we don't get along with people at church. Now, one thing they know about me, they can't fool with me. Oh, come on, talk to me now. Don't be looking at me like you're brand new, because some of you done said it to me. I don't care about them, and they know I'm up there for the Lord. Now, let me tell you something about ministry. All ministry has to do with relationships. And it doesn't matter where you go, you're going to have to deal with people. And that's what troubles me about some people. This idea that it's always somebody else. See, that everybody is against you because I'm with the Lord and I like the Lord. And that's why they don't like me. See, they don't fool with me. But baby, I will tell them. Now listen, if everywhere you go, folk don't like you, maybe it's not just because of you and the Lord. It just might be that the Lord got some folks somewhere else, and maybe he says that if you're going to, that there is personal affection. We ought to work on loving each other. Because the most effective ministry we can do as a church is to show love, this idea of unity. Here is my commitment. My commitment when I came was to love you and to not give you the option on whether or not I love you. Your actions don't determine whether or not I love you. I love you because I am called by God to love, and when I look at me and I figure if God can love me, I can love everybody else I know. So Paul says to this church at Philippi, I love you, I am longing to see you. But he just doesn't have this word of personal affection. He uses some public affirmation. You hear what he says? It's in the text. Just walk along with me. I'm not making any of this up. He says, you are my joy. He says that I get joy from being around you. And just as every pastor ought to make it his commitment to show love to the people, all the people of God ought to make it their commitment to be a joy to the man of God. You ought to make a commitment that I am going to be joyful. I want to be somebody who is a source of joy. He says to this church, you are my joy. But here's a fancy word for you. Okay, here's our new word for today. There is a term, eschatology. Eschatology, E-S-C-H-A, tology. I figured you could spell tology. The esca was going to get you. You know what it is? It's the study of last things. When we talk about Revelation and what's going to happen in the end, that word eschatology. Now, why did you tell us that, Pastor? Because Paul says this. He just doesn't say, you are my joy. Paul says to the Philippian church, you are my crown. He says, in my work right now, you are my joy. But in the last times when I have to stand before God, I'm going to say to God, God, look at the church at Philippi. This idea is of an athlete that they get the laurel wreath, that they place the wreath around his head. He says that what is on my head, my winning medal, my prize, is the church at Philippi. Let me say that to you, Westside. Do you know you are my crown? That my commitment to you as I spend these waning years, these final years of my ministry, that I want to be able to say to God when I stand before him, Lord, my crown and my joy was the Westside Church. I gave them everything I had. He says in the end, when I stand before God, and Paul says the reason I can handle even facing death is because when I stand before God, I'm going to say, God, I did my best while I was there. He says, you are my crown and my joy. He says this, so whoever reads this will hear. And I just don't love you and long for you, but you are my crown and my joy. But then he gives them this powerful admonition. He says, here is what I want you to do, my beloved. You can walk with me right there. He says, so stand fast in the Lord. He says, I want you to stand. Having done all to stand, stand. Now here is what he says. He says, I love you. I want to see you. But until I get there, in the face of everything I'm going through, you stand. This idea is holding the line. Almost like we have that idea in football that I just want you to hold the line. Even if you don't advance, at least don't retreat. Just stand fast. Hold the line right here, because the day is coming when you're going to win. Here it is. Here is our shout. He expects for us to stand, because the truth of the matter is sometimes the best you can do is just to. Sometimes you can't fight. You can just stand. Now let me tell you here is what is indicting in this text. When Paul writes this to the early church, he himself is in prison. They are facing persecution. But what persecution could not do to the first century church, popularity is doing to the 21st century church. First century, they would be burned at the stake. They would be thrown in fire. And you and I, if we're honest, because our faith has been, we kind of have a soft faith in America where it's popular to be a Christian. We would say, if somebody would say, now I'm going to put everybody in the pit who is a Christian. We'd be lined up to say, now I'm a Christian, but now you need to get brother so-and-so. He's a way bigger Christian than I. He's been at this church a whole lot longer than I am. Now, I joined this church this year, so if you get us in the order in which we joined, you know what they did in the first century church? It would be an honor for me to be next. But what persecution did not do in the first church, popularity has watered down our faith. Because we are desiring to be popular. When Billy Graham can get a walk on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for preaching, popularity has muzzled our voice. Those of you who have Sirius or XM radio, I was listening to Joel Osteen the other day. He's not on the religious channel, he's on the entertainment channel, so that now preaching is entertainment. And I see evangelicals who are lining up to defend this president who has lied on record over 12,000 times. He came to town the other day, and the first person that you see standing is the leader of one of the largest churches in our city. Popularity. Do you really think that Herod would have invited Paul in? And in an attempt, and let me say this, I want us to be out of the box in ministry. I want us to do things, but I don't want us to sell our convictions to be liked. There has to be a voice, that prophetic voice, that still says to unpopular things that this is what the church stands for. It is not, and listen, let me be clear to you. I don't care if any other church in town likes me. I don't care if anybody else in Dallas. I'm called to lead Westside Baptist Church, and I don't have to be popular with anybody. I've preached all over the world. I preached, if won't nobody else hear me but y'all, I am content. You are my crown. You are my joy. And we need preachers who aren't afraid, who will say in the face of what's going on, it's not right, and we're not going to pretend it's right. While I'm here, I think I need to say a word. And I need to say a word because a lot of stuff I say, if you follow me on Twitter or on Facebook, you'll know I say it. I'm sick of churches who jump up and celebrate acts of forgiveness like the judge hugging, and that's a whole nother thing. I'm sick of churches and people who will celebrate that kind of thing and both of John, James, a brother hugging. I'm sick of folk who celebrate that and won't condemn the fact that she walked into a man's house and killed him. If you want to celebrate forgiveness, you need to speak out against acts of violence. Now, if you're there on the front line saying she was wrong, she's still wrong. And while I am here, go ahead and preach, Delvin. I am. Don't think that because I want justice, I am against forgiveness. The thief on the cross who Jesus forgave still had to die. I don't expect for her to pay for her sins. I want her to be saved, but I do want her to pay for her crimes. The thief didn't pay for his sins, but he paid for his crimes. And Paul says in this text, stand. And that's what we need, some folk who will stand in the face not only of persecution, but of popularity. We need to stand. Stand when you don't feel like it. Stand when the whole world is against you. Stand when it looks like your back is against the wall. Paul says, stand. And so he gives this example of how to develop unity by being affectionate and being affirming and admonishing people. When was the last time you said something encouraging to people? When was the last time you made it your commitment? It is a commitment of mine. Anybody in this church who sees me will tell you that one of the things I work at is saying nice things. I'm going to tell you how pretty you are. I'm going to tell you how handsome you look. I'm going to tell you how you ought to make it your habit that folk look to see you so when they leave, they will feel better. He does that. Now here is the exciting part for me in this text. After he gives this pastoral example of unity, he gives a pastoral exhortation to unity in verses 2 and 3. Here is a shouting. I like reading the Bible because I'm still learning new stuff. And so here in the early church, Paul talks about two people in Philippi that are a challenge to the unity. Let me tell you about the people. These words, Syntyche and Euodia, their names, one means pleasant journey or almost she has arrived. The other's name means she is well known, well connected, right? So you have these two ladies, they are prominent, they are powerful. So anybody who has a major issue with women in leadership in the church hasn't read Philippians. For those who are arguing that this is liberal theology that says women, Paul is clear. When you read, Paul says they are prominent. They have helped me. Read the ministry of Jesus. They have helped me. And I need to suggest for those who think that women won't have a prominent part, it is foolish of the church to think that people who make up 70% of the congregation aren't going to have something to say about leadership. Now, if the men ain't saying nothing, sisters, you ought to at least be waiting there. Ain't none of my boys hollering. I ought to have some sisters who holler up in here. They are in prominent places. They are leaders in the church. Paul says their names are in the book of life. It is here. I'm not making it up. He says they are fellow workers with me. But here is the problem. They have a public contention. And Paul says that their disunity and distraction are threatening to tear up the fellowship. Now, I know you don't know any strong-willed women who get into it with other women, or strong-willed men who get in it with other men, get into it. But watch what Paul says. Here is the indictment in this passage. Paul says that they are a blessing to the kingdom, but they are a burden to the congregation. You missed that shout right there. Your name is in the Lamb's Book of Life. You are all that with God. You and God got the hookup, but you're about to tear up your local church. It's possible to be a plus in the kingdom and a minus in the congregation. Delvin Ashton is preaching today, and folk, I'm trying to see if my mic went to Greek, because you're looking at me like you don't know. Do you know of any well-connected or well-off people who have contentions, and when they are committed to get their own way, it threatens to tear up a church? I'm preaching today. That's why we've got to be careful. That's why you got to be careful that just because, and here is the twofold challenge. You got to be careful. Just because you are saved does not mean that everything you say is going to be right. And that if you are on your way and we have different ways to get to the same destination, we ought not ever make it so personal. It's in the text. I'm not making it up. We ought not make it so personal until if you won't go my way, I don't just stop liking your ideas, I stop liking you. And the challenge in the church, particularly with people who are prominent, people who are either well-connected or well-off, is we get to the point where we're used to running it everywhere else until we get to the point that if you don't go with me, it's not that I stop liking your idea, it's I stop liking you. And I need to suggest to you that we've got some days of challenge ahead of us as a church. We've got some decisions to make, but just because I don't agree with your idea, I will not stop loving you. That ought to help me up to there. Now listen, this is why I don't let arguments go on for past 5-10 minutes. Because after about the first 5 minutes, it ain't got nothing to do with principle anymore. Come on, somebody, am I the only one of them? Well, I think it ought to be this way. Well, I think it ought to be that way. Well, I think this is why I think it ought to be, and this is why I think it ought to be. Well, this is why. Well, and you know what, your mama, and then any witnesses in here? You might be sitting by, so you can just look at me and wave. So here is what Paul says. Paul says to them, see, y'all, we keep thinking the Bible is just spiritual, but the Bible is practical. Paul said, it's some folk who are helping they are blown up in the kingdom, but because they've got into a contention with each other, they are threatening to tear up the church. Paul has a plan. It's here. The first thing Paul says is he makes an appeal to those women. It's in the text. He says, I'm asking y'all, work it out. And this says women in the text, but don't dismiss this. I read some people who want to read into this that because they are women, they are having this problem. No, that has nothing to do with it. Because you and I know there have been way more men in church fight than women. He says to this, the two of you ought to make it your business to go to that person. And it would be such a great thing at churches if we understand that when we have issues with people, the best person to talk to is that person. Because a lot of times we make decisions about people we don't know anything about. He says, go to them. And then he uses a word in the Greek. It's translated in our text, if you'll follow with me in the text, it's translated in our text to say, he says, and I urge you also, a true companion. This term in the Greek is the term syzygus. We get a term S-Y-Z-Y-G-Y, syzygy. It means to be in line. What he's saying, it's translated, in some Bibles it will have that name, S-Y-Z-Y-G-U-S. It's not a proper noun. He's saying the one who has the same heart, who thinks like me. It was probably the pastor because he's writing this letter and it is known. He is saying to the pastor, he says, I need you to go to them and help them work it out. He says, I need you to talk to them to help them work it out. But then, He says to the rest of you, to the church. Paul says it's so important that it is on all of us if we allow any of us to tear us up. Go slow again. Paul said it is an indictment on all of us if we allow any of us to tear all of us apart. You know, the pastor needs to say something. No, you need to say something. Because you're going to hear some stuff the pastor can't hear. Oh, come on, wink, wave, sneeze, bark. They say stuff around you they won't let me hear. So he says it is our responsibility to go and to work it out, because he says that when contentions become public, the church's witness is affected. When folks see us fighting, our witness is affected. And so he says, with the spirit of love, why do we do it? He says, because we understand that the priority in ministry is not us getting our way, it's God getting the glory. I don't expect you to agree with everything I say. Dr. Bradley was sharing talking to me and Ms. Atchison in the office this morning, and he said, if you always agree with everything I say, then one of us is useless. Now, I know you looking at me like he got that from somewhere. He may have, but he told me, so I got to give him credit. If everybody in your circle agrees with you, you need to get a new circle. But everybody in your circle, if it's about ministry, ought to have giving God the glory. And the ultimate end is God's glory. And God's glory is far more important than my opinion. God's glory is far more important than my will. And it is my desire that God is going to get the glory. Listen to what he says. He says, okay, y'all do that. And then he says this, and I'm out of here. He says, you have labored with me in the gospel. He says, I urge you, help these women. Help them because they have labored with me in the gospel, and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the Lamb's Book of Life. He says, y'all handle up on that. Deal up on that, because our ministry is too important. What we have to offer is too significant. Y'all go ahead and settle that. It's like Paul is in prison. He said, y'all squash that. I know y'all are major ballers in the kingdom, but squash that. I don't want you to be big in the kingdom and little in your congregation. Don't be so busy helping God that you can't help your church. He says to them, be about the business of sharing Christ. I'm closing with the final story. I had a rare experience this week. Paul tells them here in this text to share Christ, and we are laborers with God. Tell that story to get as many people as we can to know what Jesus has done for us. Paul really says it's a challenge. Paul says this. I was reading an article the other day. One of my friends was writing what his grandmother said. And his grandmother was talking about preachers who talk about other preachers, who kind of just condemn them constantly. He said, nobody has ever gotten saved listening to a preacher talk bad about another preacher. Do you know no one has ever gotten saved watching us belittle other believers? Our job is to tell people about Christ. Here's my story, and I'm out here as we share our story about Christ. I was backing out of the garage the other day at church, and as I'm backing out of the garage, I found out, I didn't even know what this word meant, rebar. It's a thing that comes out of the side of a sidewalk when they lay in cement, right? Rebar. He knows syzygy, but he doesn't know rebar, right? So as I'm backing out my truck, I hear shh. Mrs. Atchison said, "Is that the garage?" I said, "No. I may have hit a sprinkler, but it sounded like air." I get out of my car. Sure enough, my tire's been poked. As I turn around, my tire's been poked. It's going down. When I called, coming back in and called, and I think Trooper Jones was there and Mark Wilcox, and I said, I need to get the car fixed. I'm going to call Geico, da-da-da. Well, Mark Wilcox, and y'all don't have to tell him about this, but Mark Wilcox was picking on me like a big brother who wants to make his little brother tough. And I said, Mark said, you got on a short sleeve shirt, Pastor, you got a jack right here. I said, listen, Mark, I'm soft. My exact words was, quit trying to make me tough. I'm a sissy. I don't change tires. I don't do it. He said, okay, well, whatever. He says this. He says, as we are getting ready to leave, he said, Pastor, this tire, because it got hit in the side, got punctured in the side, this tire can't be saved. The tire was pierced in the side, and it couldn't be saved. I said, that's strange to me, because the only way I got saved is because somebody got pierced. In the side. He was wounded for my transgressions. He was bruised for my iniquity. The chastisement of my peace is upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. I'm so glad that Jesus didn't hit a rebar, but he was pierced in the side. Because of his piercing, we can share the good news of Jesus Christ. I ask you to join me in unity in working to share the story of Jesus. I get the rare and rich privilege of inviting you to come into covenant relationship with Jesus Christ. If you're here today, I want to invite you to come and to know him.
Westside, here are our announcements for the week. Beginning October 4th through October 25th, shop will be on Wednesdays from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. WBC welcomes the Lewisville Police Department on October 8th as part of the Faith and Blue initiative immediately after worship service in the Assembly Hall. They will share information on how to be safe in the community, school, and home. Light refreshments will also be served. The whole ministry is providing blood pressure checks every second Sunday at 9:30 and 11 a.m. in room 1136. The Men's Brotherhood Ministry is conducting Bible study for all men ages 18 and older on the first Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m. in the choir room. The OWL Ministry, also known as the Older, Wiser Leaders, is meeting every first Wednesday of the month in room 1136, 1137, immediately following noon Bible study. Join us for fellowship and fun at Westside's annual Fall Fest celebration on October 29th at 9:45 a.m. Members are asked to donate candy, no nuts or peanut butter please, beginning October 9th. Donation bins will be located at various kiosks. Save the date and join us for an elegant evening that includes dinner, dancing, and much more when Westside's Winter Masquerade Ball kicks off on February 9th, 2024 at the Hilton Garden Inn in Lewisville. Registration is from October 1st through November 19th. Visit WBCCHURCH.org for more information. For additional information regarding any of these announcements and much more, please visit us at WBCCHURCH.org. Weekly announcements are also available on the Westside YouTube channel.